dissolved into the cool air, leaving echoes in the vast shadowed halls beneath the gaze of the Virgin Mary. In a humble corner between the Cappella Palutina and Cappella Sforza lay the Pope's resting place, not in the Vatican's gilded tombs, but here in a simple marble sepulchre. The world outside turned on, oblivious, but within these sacred walls, time seemed to pause, suspended in golden light filtering through towering stained glass. In this stillness, a tiny figure remained, pressed against the cold marble floor. He was no majestic beast bred for ceremony, nor a pampered pet with a collar. He was a stray, an aging mutt with patchy grey fur and eyes clouded with sorrow. His name, known only to the man now entombed, was Amigo. The dog had followed the funeral procession the day before, weaving through crowds, past velvet ropes and distracted guards. No one had stopped him. Perhaps they saw the grief in his gaze, the quiet determination in his limping steps. Now, he lay at the foot of the tomb, his frail body curled tightly as if shielding it from the world. The priests lingering after the rites stood in silence, struck by the sight. They had expected Amigo to leave once the crowds dispersed, to wander back to Rome's chaotic alleys, but he stayed. An elderly sacristan, his hands trembling with age, set a bowl of water beside him. A young nun, her face soft with pity, offered a crust of bread. Amigo sniffed politely, lapped at the water once, then returned to his vigil, his nose resting on the marble's edge. The cold seeped into his bones, but he did not move. In his simple, instinctive way, he believed his presence was needed. As evening fell, the basilica emptied. The great bronze doors closed to tourists, their heavy thud echoing through the nave. Amigo remained unfazed by the world's retreat. Priests moved quietly, preparing for final prayers, their footsteps muffled on the polished floors. The air, thick with incense, seemed to cradle the dog, and he in turn offered a silent watch. Candlelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the tomb. Amigo's eyes, half closed, gleamed in the glow, fixed on the stone that held his friend. Outside, Rome pulsed with life. Journalists typed furiously, their stories of the historic funeral flooding the wires. Pilgrims bartered in souvenir shops, clutching rosaries and postcards. The world turned without pause. But within the basilica, a different story unfolded. Word of Amigo's vigil spread among the staff, whispered in sacristies and cloisters. "The dog won't leave," a young altar boy murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "He's guarding the Holy Father." The basilica's rector, Father Lorenzo, a man of stern tradition, frowned at the news. The dog's presence, however touching, was improper. The basilica was a place of order, not sentiment. Yet as he approached the tomb, he faltered. Amigo's frail form, dwarfed by the marble's grandeur, stirred something within him. The dog's eyes met his, not with defiance, but with a quiet plea. Father Lorenzo turned away, his throat tight. "Let him be," he said softly, "for now." Night deepened, and the basilica grew colder. The stained glass, now dark, reflected only the candlelight within. Amigo shifted, his joints aching, but he did not leave. Memories, fragmented and instinctive, flickered through his mind, a gentle hand offering scraps in a quiet courtyard, a voice calling Amigo with warmth, a moment of being seen not as a stray, but as a soul. Pope Francis, in his unassuming way, had noticed him, had loved him. And Amigo, in his wordless devotion, had loved him back. By morning, the basilica stirred. Workers swept the floors, their brooms whispering against stone. Priests prepared for mass, their robes rustling. Tour guides rehearsed their scripts, ready to usher in the day's visitors. But Amigo's presence lingered, a quiet disruption. The staff watched him, some with curiosity, others with reverence. A young priest, Father Matteo, crouched beside him, his heart heavy. "Come, little one," he whispered, reaching out. "It's time to go." Amigo raised his head, his eyes weary but resolute. As Father Matteo's hands touched his frail body, a low, heart-wrenching whimper broke the silence. The sound, raw with grief, echoed off the walls like a prayer. The priest froze, his hands trembling. The other clergy gathered nearby exchanged glances. None could bring themselves to insist. The dog's sorrow was too profound, too sacred. Two guards, their faces grim, tried next. They carried a soft blanket, hoping to lift Amigo gently. "We mean no harm," one muttered, as if the dog could understand. But Amigo resisted, not with teeth or claws, but with a deep, quiet resignation. His body went limp, his paws pressing against the marble, as if anchored by the tomb itself. The guards carried him a few steps, placing him near a side chapel. For a moment, Amigo sat there, dazed, his eyes blinking in the morning light. Then, with a slow, deliberate effort, he rose. His legs shook, his body frail from hunger and cold, but his purpose was clear. He limped back to the tomb, each step a testament to his will. The guard stepped back, defeated. From the shadows, an elderly canon, Monsignor Rossi, watched, his eyes wet. "Leave him," he whispered. "There's no greater prayer than the one he offers." Word of Amigo's vigil spread beyond the basilica. Pilgrims, hearing the tale, lingered outside, their faces pressed against the gates. A woman lit a candle, her hands trembling. "For the dog," she said, her voice breaking. Others followed, and soon a sea of candles glowed in the courtyard, their flames flickering in the dawn. Journalists, sensing a story, scribbled notes, their cynicism softened by the scene. The tale of the stray who refused to leave Pope Francis's side captured hearts, not just in Rome, but across the world. Inside, the basilica's rhythm faltered. The rector, torn between tradition and compassion, called a meeting in the side chapel. Cardinals, their crimson robes pooling around their feet, debated in hushed tones. "He cannot stay forever," one said, his voice firm. "The basilica is a place of reverence, not a shelter." But Cardinal Montini, who had known Pope Francis well, shook his head. "And what is reverence," he asked, "if not a soul refusing to abandon love?" The decision was made. The rector gave a small nod to the guards. "Let him stay," he said, "as long as he needs." The words, simple but profound, settled over the basilica like a blessing. Amigo, unaware of the debates, shifted in his sleep, curling closer to the tomb. His breathing was shallow, his body weaker with each hour, but his vigil held. Outside, the crowd grew. Pilgrims, tourists, and locals stood shoulder to shoulder, their candles a constellation of light. A young girl, clutching her mother's hand, whispered, "Is the dog an angel?" Her mother, tears in her eyes, had no answer. The bells of Santa Maria Maggiore tolled, not with triumph, but with a mournful cadence that echoed through Rome's streets. The city listened, and in its heart, it wept. As noon approached, the basilica's doors opened wider, allowing a few to witness Amigo's vigil. They stood in silence, their footsteps soft. A priest, his voice choked, leaned against a column. "He's doing what we all wish we could," he said, "but we are too proud, too afraid." The onlookers nodded, their eyes fixed on the dog, now barely moving, his head resting on the marble's edge. Amigo's story spread across the globe. Social media buzzed with photos of the basilica, of candles, of the frail mutt who had become a symbol of love. In distant cities, people lit their own candles, whispered their own prayers. The dog, once invisible, had transformed the basilica into a living heart, beating with the rhythm of 1,000 breaking hearts. Days passed, and Amigo grew weaker. The staff, now protective, brought him blankets and bowls of broth. Though he rarely ate, his eyes, once bright with determination, grew dim. But they never left the tomb. One morning, as dawn broke, a worker noticed Amigo's breathing had slowed. He called for Father Matteo, who knelt beside the dog, his hands gentle. "You've done well, Amigo," he whispered. "You've stayed." That afternoon, Amigo's heart stopped. The basilica fell silent, the air heavy with grief. The staff gathered, their faces streaked with tears. They wrapped his small body in a white cloth, placing it gently in a wooden box. The rector, his voice trembling, led a quiet prayer. "For a faithful friend," he said, "who showed us that love endures." A plaque was crafted, simple but elegant, and placed at the tomb's base. It read, "In loving memory of Amigo, a faithful friend who showed the world that love endures beyond all things." The workers installed it quietly, their hands steady despite their sorrow. Pilgrims, hearing of Amigo's passing, returned, their candles burning brighter than ever. The basilica resumed its rhythm, but it was changed. The air held a quiet reverence, an ache woven into the light. Visitors crossing the threshold felt it, a sacred pause that lingered in their souls. Amigo had fulfilled his mission. He had loved, and he had stayed until the end. And in his small, steadfast vigil, he had reminded the world that love, in its purest form, outlives even death. The days that followed were marked by a subtle shift in Rome. The story of Amigo became a quiet legend, shared in cafes and churches, a tale of devotion that softened the city's edges. Pilgrims came not just for the basilica's grandeur, but for the small plaque, their fingers tracing its words. Children left drawings of dogs beside it, their crayons smudging the marble. The staff, once bound by routine, moved with a new tenderness, as if Amigo's presence still lingered. Father Matteo, who had tried to move Amigo that first day, found himself changed. He began to notice the strays in Rome's alleys, offering them scraps and a gentle word. "For Amigo," he would murmur, his voice thick. The elderly canon Monsignor Rossi took to sitting by the tomb in the evenings, his prayers mingling with memories of the dog's quiet strength. Even Father Lorenzo, the stern rector, softened. He ordered the basilica's gates to remain open later, allowing pilgrims to light their candles long into the night. The world beyond Rome carried Amigo's story forward. In a small village in Argentina, a priest told his congregation of the dog who loved a pope, urging them to see the divine in the humblest creatures. In a bustling city in Asia, a teacher read the story to her students, their eyes wide with wonder. On social media, artists shared sketches of Amigo curled by the tomb, their captions speaking of loyalty and grace. The dog who had once been nothing to the world had become everything. The basilica itself seemed to hold Amigo's memory. The stained glass, catching the dawn, cast golden beams that seemed to linger on the tomb. The incense curling through the air carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. Visitors spoke of a feeling they couldn't name, a sense of being held by something greater than themselves. The basilica, once a monument to power and tradition, had become a sanctuary of the heart. Months later, a small ceremony was held. The rector unveiled a second plaque, this one outside the basilica, near the courtyard where the pilgrims had lit their candles. It bore no name, only a simple inscription, "For all who love without condition." The crowd, smaller now but no less devoted, stood in silence as the bells tolled. A stray dog, not unlike Amigo, wandered through the gathering, its tail wagging faintly. No one shooed it away. Amigo's legacy endured, in the quiet moments, in the way a pilgrim paused, a pet astray, in the way a priest's voice softened during Mass, in the way a child's prayer included the dogs who have no home. The basilica, with its towering columns and ancient stones, stood as it always had. But it was different. It was a place where love had been witnessed, where a small, frail creature had shone. But Amigo's vigil had only just begun. As the hours turned to days and the days into weeks, pilgrims, clergy, tourists, and even skeptics came from around the world to see the small golden-brown dog who refused to leave the papal tomb. The Vatican tried to enforce regulations, attempting several times to relocate him for health and safety reasons, but each effort ended in failure. The moment Amigo was removed, whether placed in a kennel or transported to a distant wing of the Apostolic Palace, he would slip away from caretakers and, with a near-supernatural sense of direction, return to the tomb, finding his way past guards and closed gates with uncanny ease. Soon, whispers began among the Swiss guard. "Illinois que ni un segno," they'd mutter among themselves. "The dog is a sign." Though most brushed it off as superstition, even the most hardened skeptics couldn't deny the peculiarity of it all. Amigo never barked, never begged, never slept elsewhere, and despite not eating visibly for days, he remained alert and bright-eyed, as though nourished by something unseen. A cardinal from Spain, moved by the spectacle, tried offering the dog a slice of consecrated bread during Mass. Amigo sniffed it, looked toward the altar, and gently licked the cardinal's hand. A moment captured by a tourist's phone went viral within hours. People began speaking of him not merely as a faithful dog, but as a creature with purpose, a sentinel, some said, others called him an emissary. One prominent theologian wrote a viral blog post suggesting Amigo was perhaps the very embodiment of the communion of saints, non-human, yet spiritually tethered to the soul of the departed pontiff. The Vatican press office, overwhelmed with inquiries, issued a statement: "The presence of Amigo the dog at the papal tomb is being observed with reverence. We respect the profound emotions that his vigil has stirred among the faithful." But behind closed doors, the Holy See was in crisis. Secret meetings convened in shadowed halls. Psychological experts were brought in to study Amigo. Animal behaviorists arrived and were baffled by the lack of normal biological needs. "We can't explain it," said Dr. Keller, an Austrian veterinarian. "The dog is alive, but not living as we understand it. His metabolism is altered." Either this is the most extraordinary case of hibernation or we're dealing with something outside natural law. Then came the incident on the 33rd night. As a candlelight vigil began to mark the month of Amigo's stay, a child broke through the crowd, a boy, blind since birth. He stumbled, tripping on the cobbled stone, and scraped his knees near the steps of the tomb. Amigo stood, his first movement in days, and calmly walked to the child. He licked the boy's hands and nuzzled into his arms. Witnesses said the boy gasped, then blinked, and then, amid stunned silence, looked directly into his mother's eyes and said, "He's golden like a lion." The child's name was Matteo, and doctors confirmed the next day, his optic nerves, previously undeveloped, now showed signs of spontaneous regeneration. News spread globally. Debate raged in secular and religious spheres. Was it a miracle? Coincidence? Or, as one Vatican observer wrote, an echo of divine presence expressed in loyal flesh and fur? More pilgrims arrived. Queues stretched from St. Peter's Square to the Tiber. People camped out, sang hymns, lit candles, and told stories of their own dogs long gone, as though Amigo had awakened something deeper, not just about loyalty, but about our place in a world where the divine still whispered. In response, the Vatican officially assigned 2 monsignors to observe Amigo around the clock, logging every motion and interaction. They noted patterns. The dog's ears twitched at certain prayers, especially the Latin Requiem aeternam dona ies, Domin. He responded with a quiet whine when Gregorian chants played. When the tomb was cleaned and polished, Amigo waited patiently, tail still, eyes alert, and resumed his position precisely 0.33 meters from the marble edge. But it was his reaction to the conclave announcement that stunned even the most skeptical of cardinals. 3 months into Amigo's vigil, a new pope was elected, an Argentinian archbishop known for his progressive ideas and emphasis on ecological theology. The moment white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel, Amigo stirred. For the first time, he left the tomb without resistance. He walked slowly, purposefully, to the square, sat among the people, and lifted his head as the new pope appeared on the balcony. He did not bark or howl, he simply stared. The pope, named Leo XIV, looked down, visibly startled, then offered a blessing. "Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus," he said, and Amigo laid down and closed his eyes. That night, the dog disappeared. For 3 days, chaos reigned. Social media exploded. #FindAmigo trended worldwide. Conspiracy theories surged. Had the Vatican hidden him? Had he died and been taken in secret? Protesters formed near the walls demanding transparency. But on the 4th day, the cameras caught him again, on the edge of the Vatican gardens, sitting calmly before a small, ancient statue of St. Francis of Assisi. The new pope went to him. He knelt before the dog and whispered something no microphone caught. And then something even stranger occurred. Amigo stood, walked behind Leo XIV, and entered the papal residence, where he would stay. From that day on, Amigo became part of the pontiff's daily life. He was present at morning prayers, sat quietly during diplomatic meetings, and even joined processions, walking behind the cross-bearer. Rumors spread that Amigo would occasionally stare at certain visitors in a way that made them visibly uncomfortable, particularly politicians or tycoons accused of corruption. One ambassador from a war-torn nation reportedly left in tears, saying, "The dog knows what we did." Scientists who had once examined him were now forbidden from touching him. The Pope referred to Amigo as a companion sent by the breath of God, and offered no further clarification. And yet, a quiet investigation continued. Within the Vatican archives, documents were uncovered, old, fragile pages dating back to the 14th century. One described a dog remarkably similar to Amigo who had appeared at the tomb of Pope Celestine V and then vanished. Another spoke of a golden hound that wandered the hills of Umbria shortly after the death of St. Francis himself. All of them described the same characteristics: silence, loyalty, and a sense of divine presence. The archivists presented these findings to Pope Leo XIV. He smiled and said only, "God keeps his messengers humble." Years passed. Amigo did not age. His coat remained pristine, his movements unhurried but fluid. No grey hairs. No signs of decay. When asked if the dog would ever leave, the Pope said, "He will stay until his task is complete." But no one knew what that task was. Then, on the 7th anniversary of Pope Innocent XIV's death, Amigo vanished again, this time for good. Searches turned up nothing. Cameras captured no footage. One moment he lay beside Leo XIV during evening prayer, and the next, he was gone. The Pope looked sorrowful but calm. His work is done, he told a tearful crowd gathered in the basilica. Where had he gone? Some said he returned to whatever realm he came from. Others claimed he was seen walking along the banks of the Tiber at dusk. A few whispered that he'd been called to another soul, in another part of the world, and was now sitting in quiet vigil beside some unknown saint. Years later, a small plaque was added to the crypt wall where Pope Innocent XIV was laid to rest. It read, "Here sat Amigo, faithful beyond measure, a companion to the soul, a light in loyal form. May all who mourn take comfort, and all who hope remember." And so the story of Amigo became legend, told in hushed tones in Vatican corridors, immortalized in stained glass in a modest chapel in southern Italy, and spoken of at candlelight gatherings where the faithful and the doubtful alike gathered to wonder. Was he just a dog? Or was he something more? Would you like the final section to wrap up the entire story in an epilogue-style conclusion, or focus more on the future rumors and legacy of Amigo?